Hey everybody, welcome back to yet another video. And today's a bit of a different video, once again a little bit of a different video, because today it's more of a personal opinion on a comment I get actually quite often. Basically anytime I put out a negative video or a video critiquing a game. And that comment is, it's a scam, basically. Right, and then it's not entirely sure what they mean, like if they really think it's a scam or not, but you see it an awful lot. And even I, as a much smaller content creator, right, like a tiny people cute content creator, I see this comment an awful lot, which makes me either think that a significant part of gamers have the idea that games are typically created as scams, which makes no sense, or there's something else going on. But I just wanted to give my impression and my opinion on this, and why I also typically refrain from even suggesting that a game is a scam. So let's start with the definition of a scam. And the scam, whatever definition you pick, is basically a scheme, which is what the word might be derived from. It's a scheme that intentionally is designed or purposely designed to make you lose money, right? That is usually a scam. It's usually about money. And whenever the comments are in the games, that is the implication, right? The people that comment this, they imply that this game was created only to be sold and to make the developers make money, and then that's it, right? And then they take the money and leave or something. Then it would be a scam, right? So it's important to realize that in at least most countries, a scam is a crime, right? And basically, so if you're saying like this is a scam, you're basically accusing the developers of being criminals. Now, that's one of the reasons that I'm not saying this all that often. Because a scam, at least in the Netherlands, is a punishable offense. And depending on the size of the scam, people go to prison. I don't think that, this is typically what's happening in games. Alright, so that's the definition part. Maybe to clarify, we should talk about a few examples that this comment comes up with quite often. Way more often than with other games. Because, for example, not many people in Last Epoch or on Last Epoch videos, even critical ones, the comment of it's a scam doesn't really appear. And the reason why is because it is clear to most people that this is a decent game. Even I'm in my videos, I hopefully relay the message still, even if I'm critical, that Last Epoch is a decent game. And it's still in early access. And people basically trust what is going on over there. You may not like it, right? You may not enjoy the game. You may not like the design decisions being made or the direction the game's headed in. But generally, people seem to agree, at least on the comment section, that this is not a scam. However, if I make a video about Wolcen, for example, the sentiment changes a little bit, right? The sentiment changes because quite often in Wolcen videos, and it's really not that hard to make a negative video about Wolcen, right? Then those comments do come in. They do come in, right? People say, hey, this is a scam. They said, for example, similar things with No Man's Sky, right? No Man's Sky was supposed to be a scam. Wolcen was supposed to be a scam. Recently, Nexus, people said also it's a scam. And honestly, plenty of other games. And something that these games have in common, and why I think people comment something like this, is that these games, they promised something but did not deliver. No Man's Sky basically promised the world, and it did not deliver, at least back then, right, when it got released. Wolcen started out as a completely different game and promised a lot of interesting and cool features, or some unique, never seen before features in an action RPG like this. It started out as Umbra, and that was like, I think it was like, is that like 7 years ago by now or something? It's a long time, right? And people supported that Kickstarter, and there were promises made in that Kickstarter, and for one reason or another, these promises were not kept. Wolcen is a rather different game than Umbra was supposed to be. And so people conclude like it's a scam. And Naxia, a much smaller game, but basically the same pattern. Naxia promises still on their early access all sorts of things. It had quite a few of those things in an early playable version, just like Umbra did, right? There was an Umbra Alpha that people played and people really enjoyed. But none of that made it into the end game. And with Naxia, it's the same thing, right? Currently, if you play Naxia right now versus 1.5 years ago, you're really surprised because there is nothing left of the original game. So there's a common pattern here. People are being fed expectations, either purposefully by the marketing team or by someone like Sean Murray, going out on like all news channels and all media outlets and saying how amazing the game is. And they play the game, it's really not that good, right? That is a huge discrepancy right there. With Wolcen, Wolcen is probably the worst marketing team in games history. Like, I have no idea what these guys are doing on marketing, but they for sure are clueless. So it's not the marketing part as so much just the whole Kickstarter part, I feel, and the fact that they had playable demos that people really enjoyed, and for some reason they decided they couldn't continue on that road, and they created something completely different. And with Naxia, they're completely clueless. And I'm sure there are plenty of other examples of this as well, right? So if you look at these games, are they scams? Well, I don't think so, right? I don't think so. No Man's Sky was all sorts of things, but mainly it was just a huge discrepancy between what was promised, someone who was way too enthusiastic, Sean Murray, about their own game, expectations of players that were way too high, and then a game that simply didn't deliver. Now, there is a beautiful video from the internet historian about the redemption, I think it's called The Redemption of No Woman's Land or something. And it describes the aftermath, basically, of the release of No Man's Sky, which was a complete disaster. And then what this studio did to eventually, 2 years later or something, create a game that did live up to what it originally was supposed to be. And even to this date, No Man's Sky, the studio, I don't know the name of the studio by heart, but these guys, they keep, is it like Hello Games or like Happy Games or something? These guys, they keep implementing the updates they promised years ago. These updates are still free, and clearly it's not a scam, right? There has to be the proof of this not being a scam. Because if this was a scam, then they would have sold their millions of copies, which they did, and they would have ran with the money, right? Like, then it's a scam, right? Then you could say, okay. But no, that's not what happened. These developers, they invested their own money, and Sean Murray even sold his own house and took a mortgage on his own house to pay for the studio. You're not gonna do that if you're trying to run a scam, right? That makes no sense whatsoever, because if you're trying to run a scam, surely you're not gonna invest like $200,000-$300,000, if not more, just for the odd chance that your scam is working out. Because surely not all scams are working, right? I'm not an expert on scamming, but I can imagine that it's not that easy even to pull off a successful scam, right? Like the Ponzi scheme things and stuff. Like, you actually need charismatic people. You need a believable story. You need, I think, a lot of elements to actually pull off a successful scam. So it's not easy. However, what is also not easy is creating games, right? Creating games is not easy, and we see it time and time again. But we'll get to that in a little bit. So, No Man's Sky, clearly not a scam. Wolcen, these guys are also trying still to fix their own game. They have sold probably millions as well, They had about 130,000 people playing at launch simultaneously, by the way. But still, they're trying. I'm not saying the game is good or anything, or that they're doing a good job in that sense, but I am saying that it's not a scam, because if it was a scam, they wouldn't have released the Blood Trail, and they wouldn't have released the updates to the Blood Trail, which they call Bloodstorm, or it's the other way around. Once again, guys, there's marketing over there that makes no sense whatsoever. But the point is, they're still working on it, right? And you may not like the updates, and you may not like what they do, but they're still updating. It's still free, and they're aware that their game is not that great and that they need fixes, which is also the first half or 8 months or something after the release. All they did was fixes. And then Nexus, I guess in theory could still be a scam, but I don't think it is, right? These guys, like, they have a Discord, they have a game on their hands that they're trying to make. And also with Nexus, I mean, how many copies did they realistically sell, right? I mean, it can't be too many. Their Discord is basically deserted. There is really not much traction on Steam posts or social media. I follow them on Twitter as well. Like, it's a hard sell that this is a scam, because even if it is, it's a very unsuccessful scam, right? Because nobody's basically buying their game, especially not after watching my video. So I think we can establish pretty safely that none of these things are actually scams, because you're implying that the developers are criminals. You're implying that on purpose they're coming up with this scheme with the sole purpose of making you lose money. Now, there are better ways to do this, right? You're not going to go through the hassle of creating an entire video game. You're going to create the illusion maybe that you're creating a video game, right? Like some potential scams. But you're not actually going to create a video game. Like, why would you actually spend the time? That makes no sense. But then you can question, like, well, what is the reason then that there is, for example, such a discrepancy between the launch of No Man's Sky and what was promised, right? How can these guys not have seen what the game was and not overpromise by such a large degree? Once again, the internet historian goes into this quite a bit. I think it is good to realize that developers, first of all, they're just people like you and me. Second of all, they may not be the most like market savvy or even socially skilled people out there, meaning that they can more easily be coerced into saying things that they really shouldn't. And I think Sean Murray is a good example of that. Like, he just wasn't capable of saying that this game didn't contain some feature, right? So he basically answered any question with yes. And yeah, that was a bit of an issue, right? Bit of an issue. But you can't completely fault the guy either. I think people can still have good intentions, even though they're not necessarily telling the truth. It is not that black and white, right? The world is not that black and white. You can have these things exist at the same time. So I think that is one of the reasons. Another reason is in general, and this is shown time and time again, that creating games is hard, right? Creating games is difficult, and that should be no surprise, but still it is. Like, it's very easy to create a Kickstarter with some nice pictures and still have like a decent fleshed out idea of what your game is going to be. But in reality, nobody can predict the future, and you have some sort of impact on that future because it is your own game. But the impact, I think, is often overstated. Like, I am an IT architect in a very large corporate organization, and we have projects all the time, right? And I am doing the IT architecture for those projects. And these are large scale projects. We work on them with probably your average indie studio, right? 20, 30, 50 people at the same time. We're working on these projects for half a year, an entire year. And an example of this would be, for example, in my case, chat functionality, right? A live chat widget, or something like setting up a video tool so that people can have a conversation with an advisor in our corporation. And these are tools that already exist on the market, right? We don't even have to think about this ourselves. But still, it not only takes always much longer than we anticipate, but also it usually doesn't turn out the way we thought it did. Even though we're buying basically a product from someone else and implement that product, right? My point is, it is really hard upfront to predict what is going to happen, even if you have like experts, subject matter experts, you have like good project managers, you got the whole thing, right? Even if you buy a product like which is basically good to go, you can just implement it, and still it does not work out the way you thought it did. So I can only imagine with games how this is going to be, right? It has to be really bad. Has to be really bad. I mean, I'm sure that there's like half of the time stuff happens over there and they're like, holy shit, right? That was not intended at all. Like, what is happening over here? We need to fix this. So I think the bug fixing, the QA, the testing part is going to unearth so many issues in games, because it's a creative process, right? You have to deal with these engines. You may not have like super experienced developers, and I can imagine that especially the startup period can take a long time for something to actually get going. But then you already had the part of the ideation phase, right? You already told the public, like, hey guys, this is what our game is going to be, but you don't really have your game just yet. And from that moment, from ideation to your actual game, it's gonna take a few years, and a lot of things can happen in a few years, which is why I think there is quite often a disparity between what the Kickstarter initially promised and what you are getting delivered down the line 3 years later. If you make a card game or something, then it's probably okay, because your scope is rather small. If you make an action RPG, it already gets a little bit more tricky, right? Last Epoch in their Kickstarter did make promises that they didn't keep in the end. I don't necessarily want to get into that too much, but even a game like Last Epoch, which has got their shit together quite well, have put stuff in there that they didn't realize in the end. MMOs is completely off the charts, right? So that's another reason. Making games is hard. That's the second reason. But then are no games a scam? I think the most likely category for scams are MMO games, for a few reasons. First of all, the MMO gamer is probably the most desperate gamer out of all the gamers, because these guys haven't had a decent game for over a decade, right? You can, if you really enjoy MMOs, you can basically play two games, right? You can World of Warcraft, where Blizzard is just like sucking the fun and the money out of it, or you can play Final Fantasy XIV, which is a great game. It's just not for everyone. And apart from those two games, there's really nothing else, right? You can do Black Desert Online if you like grinding. There are options. I'm not saying there aren't any other games, but there aren't any real viable options that have these numbers. In the West, I should say. I'm aware that in Asia there's apparently tons and tons of MMOs, super popular, and they never really make it over here. But in the West, these are your options, right? So the MMO audience is desperate, and a desperate audience is a good audience for a scam, right? If you also, for example, would run, let's say, a good scam in Corona times, a scam would be something of a holiday, right? If you can somehow promise people a holiday this time of the year, that could be a good scam, because the people are desperate, right? People want to get out. It's summer. Well, it's raining outside, but it's summer or close to being summer. This is what they want, right? Same thing for MMOs. People are longing for a good MMO and they haven't got one in like 10 years. Then you come up with something like Chronicles of Illyria, which seems extremely promising. And there's a good video of Kira TV about this. There's a few good videos from him about this. That could very well be a scam. I'm not an expert on this, but it's got all the signs. Because, for example, there is no actual game, right? There's no actual gameplay. There's lawsuits already being issued. It's got a lot of issues, right? So that could definitely be a scam. Another game, Star Citizen, has by now raised $350 million. That is more than your average Avengers budget, for example, and they have not really delivered much at all. Yeah, you can buy a spaceship for like 10 grand or something, like real money, and fly it around. But I'm following someone streaming the game every now and then, and there's practically nothing there, right? There's a bit of a world, but so it's kind of curious to see where the 350 million went. It didn't go into at least effective game development, right? It may have still gone into game development, but it's a little bit fishy, right? You have to say it's a little bit fishy. And I think there might be a few other MMOs out there that, you know, it's like not entirely sure what's going on there. I saw another video on Dream World, which is apparently I'm not sure. I'm not really into the whole MMO business, but I think if you see scams, you see them over there, because for scams to work, like, you need like desperate people. You also need a sizable audience. Like, it doesn't make sense for an indie game to start scamming. Not only have a lot of indie developers like Sean Murray actually invested part of their own like savings or even their own mortgage or their own house, but the numbers that a typical indie studio will reach is not gonna cut it for a scam. Right? You're not gonna risk going to prison for 20,000 euros in a lot of cases, right? And coming up with an elaborate scam. Like, you might as well develop the actual game, right? You might make more money that way. That's not really gonna happen. So the MMOs, they have like millions of potential players. If they start a Kickstarter, it can rake up money real fast, and a lot of money for that as well. And people are so desperate that they keep giving. Like, see Star Citizen, see how much money Chronicles of Illyria made. I think also 8 million or something like that. I'm not saying scams don't exist at all. I think they do, especially in the MMO genre, because there it makes the most sense to start a scam. But mostly in indie games and in the type of games that I cover, scams are extremely rare or don't really happen at all. And that's why I don't call out games like this. And that's why I refrain from even suggesting that something is a scam. Because if you think about it for more than 1 minute, it usually makes no sense that this would be a scam. Most of the time, it is simply incompetence of developers. Because making games is hard, and we're seeing it time and time again, right? We see it at Wolcen, which is decent-ish enough, okay-ish, I guess, at this point in time. But it's not a great game, and it's definitely not what was promised. We're seeing it at Nexus, much smaller scale, but apparently making games is hard because I have no idea what's going on over there. And we saw it at No Man's Sky, and we see it at plenty of other games that it is simply not easy to create a decent game. So I think we should respect the developers more that do pull off, you know, the decent game part, which means the developers of Path of Exile, right? The developers of Last Epoch, probably developers of Diablo. I don't really play Diablo, but I think for what it is, it's pretty decent. You probably should respect those guys a little bit more, because you have plenty of examples that some of you might call scam, that are not actually scams, that are just sheer incompetence of developers. Because making games is hard, right? It's not easy. So that's really all I wanted to say. Quite a bit of a rambly video. But nonetheless, I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you see at least my point of view. And that's it. If you enjoy this kind of stuff, you can subscribe. Makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside, which is really nice. And like the video if you like it, and dislike it if you didn't. If you thought it was too rambly or too long, maybe. See you soon, guys. Bye bye.